We're going to hear later on today what happened in Shrewsbury, but, you know, the headline is lots of babies died when they didn't need to.
Yes, I think it's going to be a very sobering morning. I commissioned this report back in 2016 when two families came to see me and they were worried about the circumstances surrounding the death of their children. And I'm afraid it mushroomed, having started investigating the complaints from 23 families. Don Ockenden ended up looking at nearly 2,000 cases. But one thing I would say, Kay, it's very important. I was listening to your interview just now with Dominic Raab. The NHS facilitates the birth of nearly 600,000 babies every year. The vast majority are totally safe. And indeed, they're getting safer. But I think today's report is going to be a very sobering read.
Yeah. We saw what happened in Mid-Staffordshire, and that was, of course, under a previous government's watch. You were in charge, weren't you, when we saw what happened in Shropshire. Learning from experience, what can we learn about why we didn't learn the lessons of what happened? I know slightly different circumstances, but the bottom line is a life is a life is a life.
Absolutely. I mean, baby deaths have come down by about a third over the last decade, but we're still 27th out of 38 OECD countries when it comes to infant mortality. So countries like Hungary and Slovenia do better than us. And I think I haven't seen the report, but I think what we'll see is that staffing is very important. My select committee said we needed 2,000 more midwives and 500 more doctors. Today, unfortunately, the government is going to vote down an amendment to the health bill, which would mean that we always trained enough doctors and nurses for the future, which is very, very disappointing. But staffing is one. Another is this so-called natural births ideology, which put pressure on mothers to avoid C-sections, even when that might have been the safer option. And I think that is something which, thankfully, the NHS has now removed all targets associated with reducing C-sections. But Shrewsbury and Telford was one of the trusts which had one of the lowest C-section rates in the NHS. And the third thing is the blame culture. I mean, even in this inquiry, Donna Ockenden believes that doctors, nurses, midwives were pressurised not to be open with her and told there could be professional reprisals if they were. And too often in the NHS, it's difficult for doctors and nurses to speak out. It's the thing they really want to do to learn from mistakes, but we make it too hard.
Is a fourth point funding as well, given the first part of the Ockenden report, which was published last year, as you know, an extra £95 million, I believe, was made available by NHS England in funding for maternity care. There wasn't enough money available.
There's always pressures on funding in all health systems because of the ageing population. Now, of course, the pandemic pressures. But I think if you ask people in the NHS today, they would say that staffing shortfalls is a bigger issue. Sometimes they have the money to pay for doctors, nurses, midwives, but they can't find the people to actually do the roles. And that is because over very many years, we haven't been training enough doctors and nurses. I set up 5 new medical schools, but even that may not have been enough. And that's why I think we need to have a long-term overhaul of our workforce planning, because it takes so long to train people up and you can't just do it overnight.
Yeah. And overseas staff being prevented from coming into the country by a Conservative government.
Well, there is an NHS visa, so it shouldn't be the case that anyone is prevented from coming in. But I think the truth is that immigration and getting doctors from overseas was always a get-out-of-jail card for the NHS over very many years. But now, with the pandemic, we have a 2 million shortage of doctors around the world, a 15 million shortage of nurses. And we've got to be honest and say we're a proper health system. We should be training the number of doctors and nurses we need. And frankly, is it ethical for us to be recruiting so many doctors from much poorer countries where they are often desperately needed at home?
Would you test yourself on Friday after the lateral flows are no longer available if you had a cough or a cold?
Well, I would. I understand why the government says we have to get back to normal. All I would say is that we just need to keep a weather eye on all of this because, you know, we have got a big spike in infections at the moment. It doesn't look like it's translating into people being seriously ill. We have got to get back to normal at some stage, but we need to be prepared to change course very quickly if the situation changes, if we had a new variant, for example. I think the lesson of the pandemic is that you have to be willing to change course quickly if the facts on the ground change.
So are you telling people at home that they should test themselves if they have the symptoms of a cough or of a cold or flu?
Yes, we should. And, that's the same as, taking your temperature if you think you might have flu. I mean, we have got a lot of COVID around. It can be very dangerous indeed, particularly to people who aren't vaccinated. But we are going to have to move, given the billions of pounds that the testing programme is costing. I mean, I'm someone who's criticised aspects of the government's response to the pandemic, but I do recognise we have got to move to some type of normality. So it's a difficult judgment as to when that happens. And I would just say if the situation changes, we might need to look again at that decision.
What about those people that can't afford to buy the tests?
Well, I hope we will find ways to make sure that they are able to access the tests they need.
OK. Talk to me about Partygate before I let you go. Basically, the first tranche of fines are in, 20 separate fines. We don't know if it's 20 separate people. What we do know is that there was a culture at Downing Street where people were breaking the law when we were in the midst of that lockdown that you were just talking about. What's your interpretation of what should happen next?
Well, I think it's very serious, the whole thing. But I think we don't yet know the full facts. There is an investigation going on. We don't know whether the Prime Minister himself is going to be asked to pay a fine. We don't know the full Sue Gray report. And I'm not saying that to sort of dodge your questions on it, Kay, but I just think that this is a legal situation. And so for people like me to make a judgment on, for example, the Prime Minister's role, I think we do have to know whether the police think that he has broken the law or not, and we don't yet know that.
No, I'm not asking.
But I think
yeah.
it is no, I know you're not, but these are very serious issues, and I, like all MPs, I've got a lot of constituents who are very, very angry about them.
Yeah, my question, I suppose, is about the culture at the very heart, very top of government, where at just the first tranche, we've seen that the law was broken on 20 separate occasions at the very heart of government.
And that is wrong. And I don't think we can defend that. I think we can understand the pressures that people were under in Downing Street in the middle of that national emergency, working all the hours that God gives. But we can't defend breaking the rules that they set for everyone else. No, we can't.
OK, good to talk to you. Can I hear one of your little ones in the background there?
You can indeed. I'm about to cycle her to school. OK, good. I'll better let you do that then. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. Thank you. Thank you.